So I did fine with that. He could tell that I had the training and I had the comprehension and the ability to go from 7/8 to 3/16 to whatever, so he had me continue to read a few more things on keyboards, and then he didn't have anything written for French horn, so he asked me to play some other horn parts. And for a French horn player, transposition is a way of life. You just have to know how to do it, because you must do it in the classical literature constantly. So I transposed some saxophone parts on the French horn and played those, and I also transposed some concert pitch parts from I know the piece, but I can't remember the title. He did it with from 200 Motels. I can't remember the name of it, but anyway, there was some French horn things in there, and I transposed them from the keyboard part onto French horn, and I did okay with that. And then he had me transpose some keyboard parts. Strictly genteel, exactly. A lot of people know the literature better than some of us band guys. So I did fine with that, and then he had me transpose some keyboard parts onto tenor, and the thing that he had me do on that was very tough. It was what was called at the time Mystery Studio Song. I don't know actually what the final title of the thing came out to be when it was recorded. It had 3 or 4 different names. It used to go into What's New in Baltimore. It was a lot of it was in 5. So I was sight reading that and transposing it on saxophone from a keyboard part. And when it got to too many 16th notes, I would just play the first of each group so he could see that I was following it and grab everything else. And then he said, "Well, this is good. You're doing real well. I understand you sing real high and strong. Let me hear you sing something. What do you know?" I didn't have anything prepared, any Zappa songs, so I said, "I don't know, Old Lang Syne." So he says, "Great, Old Lang Syne, key of A." And the band starts to play Old Lang Syne. So I sang it an octave higher than anybody would have imagined that I would sing it. And the melody in the key of A would go up to like a high F sharp. So, I'm going up to a high F sharp natural voice, and everybody just kind of goes, "Whoa." And he said, "You got it." So Old Lang Syne was the thing that was the capper. That was the one that really got it for me.
On tour, you played saxophone parts like Black Page, with in unison with the other.
Right, with Steve and Ed on percussion and Tommy. Yeah.
So how was that?
Well, again, I never studied saxophone at all. I taught myself to play. My teacher in junior high gave me the horn and the book, but with the classical background and the ability to know how to practice, which is a big thing that a lot of musicians don't know, just knowing how to practice. When you have a challenging passage to learn, you start at the beginning. You learn the first 2 notes, and then add one, then add another, and then add another, and start slow. And then you gradually increase the speed, and you add another bar, and increase the speed, and add another bar, and then you practice it until you get it to where you can play it faster than you need to, so that at the correct tempo, it's easy. That's the process, and if it takes you 10 minutes or if it takes you 10 weeks, that's the process, and you've got to do it if you want to get it. And I knew that, and I knew how to do that, and so not being really a trained saxophone player, it was a challenge for me, but, my fingers work. They do okay, and mentally I knew how to approach it, so I just worked. I worked my butt off, and when I first joined the band, everybody else had been there for I think a month maybe, rehearsing, so they had a huge head start. So it was really, really tough for me. It was the most challenging thing I'd ever dealt with, but far more than anything I ever dealt with in the classical realm at Curtis or anything. The highest level of classical stuff prepared me very well, but not completely, because with Frank, I had to be there at that level classically, but I also had to be able, as everybody else did, to play everything else, to play real authentic blues and real, improvisational jazz, and then spoof a country song, and play heavy metal, and do it all authentically, in a completely authentic way, because you can't play tongue-in-cheek unless you can play legit. You can't spoof something that you can't really do it correctly first. So that was the challenge there. So I would go to when I got the gig, he gave me this huge book of stuff to learn, all these charts and things, and not only to learn them and get them under your fingers, but then to memorize it all. So it was exhausting. I would go to rehearsals for 8 hours, and before that, though, I would get up and I would practice at home for about 2 hours, and then go in and rehearse for another 4 or 5 or 6 before Frank would come in. Arthur Barrow was the Klonmeister at that time, and we would rehearse with Arthur, and then Frank would come in and run us through some things and make some changes, and throw out half of what we'd done and do something new, and so by the end of the day, I was so tired that I could barely see. I mean, I could barely see to drive home, and that was the routine day after day for 2 months. So by the end of that time, I had it. I had all the stuff down. But boy, it was the toughest 2 months I ever went through. It was the most exhausting thing, because mental focus and mental effort is a lot more exhausting when you really are so intently focused. Digging a ditch is easy by comparison to that level of mental focus. So it was very, very tiring, but very rewarding. And by the end of that first tour, or by the end of any Zappa tour, I mean, everybody's chops were just so up, and I could sing forever. I could sing high. I was singing all the high harmonies, and then all the screaming rock and roll leads, Stevie spanking and all that kind of stuff. So my vocal chops were just so strong by the end of that tour, and I think everybody was just really, really, by the end of a Zappa tour, you were at the peak of your musicianship for everybody.
How would you compare tours of 1981 and 82 to 1984?
Well, I liked 81 and 80. I guess 84 was probably my least favorite. That was the first time that we really. Now that was Alan Zavad was the primary keyboard player on that tour, who was also a wonderful player. I think, for me, of all the keyboard players that Frank ever had, Tommy was the perfect foil, the perfect counterpart on keyboards to Frank. He just understood Frank's mind, I think, better. Aside from being a blazing player, he understood Frank and what he was trying to do better than any of the other guys. I mean, there's guys that went through that band that were incredible, like George Duke, but Tommy just really comprehended Zappa. And was able to execute it as well. I mean, a lot of people get it in, but then getting it back out is the problem, and Tommy did that better than anybody. And we didn't have Tommy on that tour. Not to say anything bad about Alan Zavad. Alan Zavad is a great player, very, very skillful player. But I missed Tommy for his, his musicianship and his approach, and that was also the first time that we went out without percussion. We didn't have Ed Mann. We were doing the MIDI thing. That was when MIDI first really hit. Yeah. And we had these DX7s MIDI together. And, while that seemed wonderful at the time, the DX7 was kind of a doinky, thin little sound. And it just wasn't the same as like a real marimba. And
you had pads in the drum set, pads, the... Not real drums.
Oh yeah, that was also Chad I guess was using. He wasn't really using any real drums there, was he? I mean, he had a real kick and a real snare, but the rest were pads. Yeah. He didn't even have cymbals, did he? Did he have a real hi-hat? I don't remember. I think he probably did. But yeah, it was a different sound, and Frank was into it. It was like new, but I think the bottom line, when I go back and listen to things from that tour, the sound of the band, it just wasn't. I mean, it was great players and all, well, there were some other things going on the '84 tour also.